and I'm happy to welcome you today to the seventh part of the series Neighbouring Russia, hosted by the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation for Freedom. Previously, we have already looked at Russia's western borders. Today, we will begin with the southwest and have a look on the Caucasus. What we want to know is what political reactions followed to the Russian war of aggression on Ukraine in Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. Some of you may know that the war in Ukraine has a major negative impact, especially on countries that suffer from territorial conflicts and have experienced wars in which Russia played an important role. Our old fronts in the Caucasus now breaking up again? And what are the citizens of these states thinking about the war? This is what we will discuss today. So please let me give a warm welcome to our three experts. At first, Mr. George Melashvili. He's the founder and president of the Europe-Georgia Institute, a hybrid non-governmental organization based in Georgia. Until now, it has evolved into one of Georgia's leading civil society organizations and has become a member of the European Liberal Forum. Second, Mr. Mikayel Zolyan, who is a researcher, analyst, and university professor at Valery Bryusov State University in Yerevan, and working as a consultant with Armenian and international NGOs. He is also the host of a TV show at a recently established Armenian educational channel called Boon TV. Last but not least, I will give a warm welcome to the moderator of today's discussion, Gigi Gigiadze. Mr. Gigiadze joined the Economic Policy Research Center as Senior Fellow in March 2021. Before, he was Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Georgia to the Kingdom of Denmark and the Republic of Iceland with residence in Copenhagen. Dear Mr. Gigiadze, thank you for taking over. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you for this introduction. I would like to once again welcome our distinguished guests, Mr. George Melashvili and Mr. Mikayel Zolyan, to today's panel. I would like to thank the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation for this initiative and this series of discussions about the neighboring Russian countries and how the situation is unwrapping in the meantime. At the beginning, I would like to ask the first question to Mr. Mikayel Zolyan. I would like to ask about yesterday's developments. We all heard that there were some very concerning developments in the Nagorno-Karabakh region, and even with casualties. If I may ask you, if you can update us what has really happened there and what the situation right now.
First of all, thank you for having me and thank you for the question. I hope everyone can hear me. Basically, what is happening in Nagorno-Karabakh for already 100 days, there's been a blockade. As you know, there's one road that connects Nagorno-Karabakh to Armenia and the outside world, which is called the Lachin Corridor. And it has been blocked by so-called environmental activists, though it has been proven already that these are not environmental activists, and there's actually a decision by the Hague court ordering Azerbaijan to open the road. But so far, basically, neither the Russian peacekeepers or so-called peacekeepers nor Azerbaijani government have done anything to open the road. So it's basically that Nagorno-Karabakh is blockaded. And also in the recent days, there are more incidents happening involving firearms and shooting. And the biggest incident was a few days ago when three policemen of Nagorno-Karabakh police, they were shot by Azerbaijanis military, and also in the fighting, two Azerbaijani military men died, and this was the biggest incident in the recent situation. And there are also incidents happening on Armenia-Azerbaijan border. But the difference is that on Armenia-Azerbaijan border, we have a European monitoring mission, like the one there is in Georgia, and this is putting a certain limit to what can happen there. While Nagorno-Karabakh is basically controlled by the Russian peacekeepers. There are the Russian peacekeepers there. Of course, there's Armenian population, but they have severely limited options of what they can do. So it is a very worrying situation, and I think the only thing that is preventing dramatic developments there is the attention of the international community. There's European Union, the European Parliament, the Council of Europe recently addressed the situation. U.S. Secretary of State recently addressed the situation. So there is international pressure on Azerbaijani authorities to open the road and to stop those military incidents. But so far, I think the result of this has been that there has been no further escalation, but they were not successful in stopping the blockade. And there are worries in Armenia that a bigger military escalation is imminent. There were some news reports that there are Azerbaijani military on the border with Armenia, and they may be getting ready for an attack. We don't know to what extent this is true. This may be just a blackmailing strategy. But it's a quite a tense period in Armenia, and it is important that we get this message out. So thank you for this question, and if there are further questions about this situation, I will be happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Mikayel. We not only in Georgia, but I'm pretty confident that throughout the world the situation is very closely watched, and we hope that there will be no further escalation in and around Nagorno-Karabakh. Now, to move to our main topic, I would like to ask again you to elaborate more about the situation in Armenia after 1 year of war in Ukraine. How has the reality in our region affected the domestic politics in Armenia, and what is the stance of the Armenian government towards the ongoing war?
So yeah, it's a big topic, but I will try to address this as short as possible. So basically, before the 2022, Armenia's situation was determined by two factors. One is so-called alliance with Russia, which is actually not really an alliance, but a kind of neo-colonial or post-colonial dependence on Russia, which has become basically a threat to Armenia's independence. And the second, most obvious factor is the Karabakh conflict, because of which we have bad relations with Azerbaijan, basically an ongoing war situation. Now it's a hybrid war. In 2020, it was full-scale war, and also a diplomatic crisis with Turkey, which has been ongoing too. So because of this situation with our neighbors, Armenia has been forced to rely on Russia, and Russia has used this reliance to advance its positions and basically turn Armenia into kind of a semi-colony, I would say. I mean, it may sound a bit harsh, but I think that's a good description of the situation. So after the war started in Ukraine, situation changed, and these changes bring both opportunities and dangers. So the danger is there are several dangers. Which the first danger, which was very strong in the first months of the war, it was obvious that if Russia had succeeded in capturing Kiev and establishing a puppet government in Ukraine, then probably they would have moved further into the South Caucasus. So obviously Georgia was next target, and they assumed that Armenia would have no choice but to join this kind of Soviet Union 2.0, whatever the name was going to be. There were discussions, and a few days before the war, actually, Lukashenko talked about this. Belarus President Lukashenko, who is sometimes he can be seen as the unofficial spokesperson for the Russian government, because sometimes he talks about things that the Russian government wants to do, but they don't talk about it openly. So a couple of weeks before the war in Ukraine, Lukashenko was talking about it, and among other things, he mentioned that Armenia will have no choice but to join the Union state with Russia and Belarus. And at the time, most people did not notice it, but in my conversations with my colleagues, in the experts, also people in the political class, this was seen as the biggest danger, that if Russia had been successful in Ukraine, then Armenia would probably have to join this new Soviet Union, whatever its design. And after it became obvious that Russia was losing the war, what happened is that Azerbaijan or Aliyev's government was trying to use this situation because Russia is the guarantor of the November 9 agreement, the agreement which ended the 2020 war. Russian peacekeepers are in Nagorno-Karabakh, and also Armenia is still a member of the CSTO, which is supposed to be the security organization. And because all these institutions are Russia and CSTO are getting weaker, this opened new opportunities for Azerbaijan to advance their demands in a very aggressive manner, whether it's about Nagorno-Karabakh, whether it's about Armenia-Azerbaijan border delimitation. And also the biggest issue was the so-called Sunik corridor or Zangezur corridor, which is southern part of Armenia. And basically Azerbaijan and Russia, they had a common interest in getting a corridor from there, which would connect eastern part of Azerbaijan to the region of Nakhichevan. And what they wanted to have an extraterritorial corridor. Armenia agreed to opening the roads, but Armenians wanted to control this road themselves. But Azerbaijan and Russia preferred that this road would be controlled by Russian peacekeepers or some other form of Russian presence, which was unacceptable for Armenia. So that was another danger. Now, when we're talking about the opportunities, I think the biggest opportunity which emerged was to weaken the Russian influence and to start working again with the West. So especially after the September last year, it became obvious that Armenia has been able to balance its foreign policy, and Armenia has been able to, some are talking about a pivot to the West. Maybe that's too strong a word, but at least Armenia has been able to rebalance its foreign policy. Armenia has been able to restore relations with the West, and the trend is that the cooperation with the West is getting stronger, which of course is making Russia angry. So here is another danger that Russia may retaliate, or Russia may encourage Azerbaijan to retaliate. So maybe I don't want to take too much time. So if we have time later, I will talk more about the details. And another opportunity is obviously the economic and social one, which is related to the migration of mostly middle-class Russians, Russian citizens who did not want to take part in the war, or they did not want to live in the non-democratic Russia, which is becoming increasingly totalitarian. And a lot of them, basically Armenia was one of the few ways out of Russia. So hundreds of thousands of Russian citizens passed through Armenia. And according to the recent data, about 110,000 of them remained in Armenia. So some of them are ethnic Armenians, some of them are not. We don't have that kind of statistics, but still, it's in any case, it's about 3% of population. We had an increase of 3% of population in 1 year. And also, most of these people are middle class, and some of them have started businesses. Some of them sold their property back to home and brought their money to Armenia. A lot of companies relocated to Armenia. Also, because of the sanctions, there were some, some trade routes changed. So Armenia has been able, as Georgia, has been able to benefit from this situation. So we had 12.6 GDP growth last year, which is quite remarkable for a country that has just gone through a war and, against a global, quite complicated economic situation. So it's been a very mixed year. So, and the war in Ukraine has, as I said, it created a lot of new dangers. But because Russia is losing, that has also opened new opportunities.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mikayel, for this. As we see, there's a very similar situation to Georgia in Armenia as well. Georgia has also received several 100,000 of the Russian migrants who are hiding or who would like to avoid this mobilization, which was announced last year by Putin. I would like to move to our second guest, Mr. George Melashvili. George, in a few hours, actually in 1 hour, we're awaiting in Georgia the visit of the German Federal Foreign Minister, Mrs. Annalena Baerbock. And this will be one of the most important visits in this year. This will be the first visit of the German coalition government to Georgia. And we heard the messages which she voiced before coming to Georgia, that the main topic which you would like to discuss in Georgia is the European approximation, 12-point recommendations which Georgia has to fulfill in order to get to the candidate status of the European Union, and of course the free media and free civil society. Please, could you tell us how the situation, how the war in Ukraine in the last year has affected the situation in Georgia? What was the stance of the Georgian government towards the developments in Ukraine, and how has the situation changed since the 24th of February 2022? Please switch on your mic.
Thank you, Ambassador Gigiadze. Well, the question you asked is a very, very broad one. So I'll try to zoom out a little bit and then zoom back to the main issue. To fully grasp the situation in the South Caucasus and in Georgia specifically, I think we also need to mention the territorial problems that Russia caused to Georgia in 2008, and also the so-called 3+3 format, which Russia was trying to stronghold on Georgia before the war in Ukraine. This format, to be precise and to make it a little bit clear, was supposed to incorporate Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, on one hand, the three South Caucasus states, and Russia, Turkey, and Iran on the other hand. Now, of course, from any geopolitical or even political perspective, this format was absolutely doomed since the very beginning, because all the three countries not only share some problems, in case of Armenia and Azerbaijan, to say mildly, but also have different vectors of foreign policy. In case of Georgia's vector has always been pro-Western, probably since 2000, when we finally signed the document which would eliminate Russian military bases from Georgia. And then, of course, Georgia increased more and more our willingness to join Western alliances, the European Union and NATO first and foremost. So to fully grasp the situation, we also need to mention what went wrong with Georgia, probably starting in 2012, when the new coalition government was elected, and when slowly we started to witness deterioration of Georgia's pro-Western course, which absolutely contradicts the willingness of the vast majority of Georgians. According to any polls implemented by international organizations, approximately 85% of Georgians fully support Georgia's integration to both NATO and European Union. For any political power, open affiliation with Russia is probably a political suicide. However, through this period of time, we have been witnessing that the ruling party has introduced slightly different attitude regarding Russia. The so-called non-irritation policy, which aimed to decrease tensions between Georgia and Russia, and, if I may quote the founder of Georgia's ruling party, to disappear Georgia as a factor of between the West and Russia. So this is, sorry?
Yeah. No, sorry. Yeah, it's an obstacle.
Yeah. As an obstacle, thank you. So this is exactly what Georgian Dream has been doing throughout these years, and they have been quite successful at this. They were able to build relationships with Russia, which is rather unfortunate in my opinion, but this is what it is. And also they were able to remain in power, which probably is the biggest and the most important motivation for Georgian Dream. As a political party and as a political force, Georgian Dream is an extremely populist political party, which reacts only to very vivid and explicit reactions from the people. We've seen it twice during this period. First time when Moldova and Ukraine were applying to EU membership status, and when the government of Georgia was quite hesitant to do it. The huge demonstration in Tbilisi in support of Georgia's Western aspirations forced the government to do the same and also to apply for the membership. And eventually, even up until now, the ruling party tries to distance itself from openly pro-Russian groups, while at the same time empowering and strengthening these groups. So if we're talking about situation in general, the government of Georgia supported Ukraine on majority of international organization, in majority of appeals to international organizations, such as United Nations, OSCE, anything else. However, on a bilateral level, there remains very unfortunate communication between the government of Georgia and the government of Ukraine. The reasoning there is, again, based on internal political struggles of Georgia and the fact that the ruling party is willing to sacrifice Georgia's international foreign interests to the local political situation and to their attempts to stay in power. So this is situation very, very generally. Since the war began, we had an influx of Russians to Georgia. Also, just like Armenia and just like our colleague has mentioned, they're mostly middle class. They brought quite significant money to the country. And even though it sounds a little paradoxically, it strengthened positions of the ruling party because we've seen economic growth, which for them was a very good selling point. Mm-hmm. So I would like to stop here on this brief overview. Yeah, and I'd like to dive into other questions. As you have mentioned, the German foreign minister, Baerbock, is coming to Tbilisi. It is a very important visit at this period of time. On one hand, because of Germany's special role within the European Union. On the other hand, because Georgia and Germany have always shared very explicit and important relationship, which has not always been very positive for Georgia. I'm referring to the decision in 2008 when Germany and France decided not to grant membership action plan of Georgia to join NATO, which caused chain of events eventually leading to the annexation of Crimea and to the current war. However, again, Germany's contribution to Georgia's development in general and the bilateral relations between Georgia and Germany have always been crucial for Georgia, especially. And also, there is a very interesting fact that very many persons who currently hold leadership position within the ruling party, they also share a very specific connection to Germany. And they have always utilized this connection for their own benefit to demonstrate that they are not pro-Russian, but they are pro-Western. Now, what we also probably should mention before I'm entirely running out of my time is the so-called Russian law on foreign agents, a very unfortunate recent development, which is unexplainable from any realistic, rational point of view. The timing of this law and the law itself, first of all, the law itself is absolutely inconsistent with European values. So if Georgia plans to join the European Union, such law should not have been initiated in the first case. And second, the timing. When we're expecting decision on Georgia's candidacy status, the ruling party decided to introduce a law which would distance Georgia from our European perspective. Now, I think a very legitimate question arises. Why did they choose this specific timing? And why did not they listen to any of Georgia's friends and allies? So this is when I want to finish my introduction, and I'm looking forward to other questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will just ask you briefly 2 points which I would like to identify. First, do you believe that by introducing this Russian-inspired draft law, the Georgian government was trying to force the European Union to cancel the candidacy for Georgia? And the second very brief question, did it somehow help this appeasement policy? Has something really improved in Georgia on the ground during the last 10 years, in your opinion?
Well, let's begin with the first question. This law, as I have mentioned at the beginning, direct affiliation with Russia in Georgia means electoral suicide. It means that exact copy-paste from Yanukovych when he refused to to deepen relationship with the European Union in Georgia will cause the same reaction. So the only reason and the only way for any party which intends to build relations with Russia is to somehow force the European Union and eventually NATO as well to deny Georgia any way of building relationships with them. So in this case, Georgian Green was trying to do a very dirty trick. They were trying to push their decision to our partners and friends in the West so that they would avoid direct blaming of being exactly what Yanukovych was in Ukraine. So this is the first question. Regarding the appeasement or non-irritation policy, it has not changed anything. Since war in 2008, Russia occupies, and of course before that as well, but after the war it became pretty obvious, Russia is occupying 20% of Georgian territory. Non-irritation policy did not bring any benefits to Georgia regarding the occupation of these territories, and on the other hand, contributed extremely to the deterioration of the quality of life of people living in the vicinity of occupied territories. These people are being kidnapped, ransoms are being paid for them to be released, and also Russia is continuing so-called creeping annexation of Georgian territory. If you are living there, you may sleep, go to bed in Georgia, and then you may wake up in Georgia proper, under Georgian control, and then you may suddenly wake up under Russian control because Russian border guards have moved the fence deeper into Georgian controlled territory. This is exactly what's going on those and with on the territories in the vicinity of the Russian occupation line. And of course, it is not helping. This non-irritation policy appeasement was a total failure.
Disaster. Thank you, George. I think it was a huge failure because the situation on the ground really deteriorated in the last 10 years, and Georgia fully disappeared from the international agenda. To move back to Mikayel, you mentioned about the balance of the foreign policy. I would like to ask you, how has the situation improved with regard to the European Union? What are the next steps with regard to the Armenia-EU relations? How do you see it will go on after the war in Ukraine is over?
Thank you for the question. I think it is a very important question. I think when I'm talking about balance, I'm describing the current situation, but I think the trend is that Armenia will be moving more and more towards West and Europe in particular, unless Russia again does something to prevent that, as it has done in many other cases with Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine. And in general, at least since September 2022, the geopolitical shift has been obvious, both in relation to European Union and United States of America. So in September 2022, there was a big attack by Azerbaijani forces on the Armenian border, which is usually called September escalation, just so that you understand the scale of that escalation. 200 Armenian soldiers died and 77 Azerbaijani soldiers. The Azerbaijani government admitted to having these casualties. So basically 300 people died in this fighting. So it was big fighting. And immediately after that, there were very strong condemnations from European Union, NATO, United States, France, and other European countries, while there was a very muted reaction from Russia and the CSTO. So it became obvious that this security framework that Armenia was supposedly in, which is the Collective Security Treaty Organizations and bilateral agreements with Russia, this was no longer working, or at least not working in the way that Armenia is interested. I mean, maybe it still serves the Russian interests, but it does not serve Armenian interests, if it has ever served them, which is another question. So after that, it became obvious that if Armenia wants to, have a security arrangement, then it has to work with the West and the US, first of all, but also European Union. And in October, there was a meeting in Prague, which was a meeting between Armenia, Azerbaijan, European Union, and also the French president was there. And after that, it was decided that EU monitoring mission will be placed on the border of Armenia and Azerbaijan. And then Azerbaijan withdrew from that arrangement, but Armenia said that we still want this mission. And this mission, first, as you probably know, basically members of the European mission to Georgia, the European Union monitoring mission to Georgia came to Armenia for some time. And then they went back, but a new mission was established. So since January, it started working in Armenia. And it is making Russia very nervous. We have seen many statements by the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs, the spokesperson, etc., who were saying that, the West has no business in Karabakh issue. The West has no business in Armenia-Azerbaijan relations. Why are they moving here, etc., etc. The answer is clear that Russia is not able to provide security. Russia is not able to provide peacekeeping, and that is why European Union is stepping in. Obviously, European Union is not a security organization, and this monitoring mission is not armed, but still it is more efficient than 2,000 Russian peacekeepers in Nagorno-Karabakh. So it shows a lot, and obviously, I think this trend will continue. There are people, unfortunately, political parties that are not represented in the parliament who are already calling for Armenia to announce that entry to European Union and NATO is a policy goal. Of course, it's very far policy goal, but it's important that these voices are heard, because a year ago, these voices were very marginal, if they were there at all. But now these voices are heard. And the government spokespeople, they have adopted a very kind of harsh language when it comes to Armenia-Russia relations, surprisingly. Several famous Russian propagandists, some of them have Armenian ethnic origin, some of them don't. They were not allowed to enter Armenia. They're on blacklist. So there is something going on. Probably there is much more going on a non-public level. Probably what we are seeing now, it is just the tip of the iceberg, or at least we hope so. But I think if this continues, Armenia-EU relations will be advancing. And I think in that sense, Armenia is slowly going in the direction which Georgia has been pursuing for decades. So I don't know to what extent that would be successful. Obviously, there are very strong obstacles, and a lot of them, but I think that's the trend where both Armenian government and Armenian public opinion are moving to. That's the direction.
Yeah, thank you very much. From this perspective, which you just described, the so-called 3+3 format seems not to be feasible, right? What George mentioned in his introduction. So 3+3 format from the Armenian perspective wouldn't be as desirable as the approximation with the European Union and the Western world, so to say.
Yeah, for Armenia, this format, it's not very desirable, as you said, because there will be basically Russia, Turkey, Azerbaijan, which are three countries that today have found a lot of common interest in several issues. So Armenia will be heavily outnumbered. Of course, there will be also Georgia, and there will be Iran, which is more pro-Armenian in those issues. So when it comes to, for example, southern Armenia, the Sunni issue, Iran has a very strong pro-Armenian position because if Azerbaijan occupies this region, then Iran will be cut off from Armenia and also Georgia, and basically this road will be closed. So if this format happens, then Armenia will have to work with Iran on these issues and with Georgia probably. But of course, this is not something very desirable. If other countries decide that they need this format, then Armenia will have no choice, probably. But it's not something that Armenia considers desirable, or it's working in that direction.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mikayel. Switching back to George. George, you already described the reality in Georgia. How do you see the next steps with regard to the improving the relations with the West, with the European Union? What needs to be done right now? How can this current government achieve the candidate status by the end of this year? Do you still believe that there is a chance that Georgia can get on the track together with Ukraine and Moldova?
Well, I'm an optimist in general, even though it's a little bit difficult to be right now. Well, the Georgian Green government has not yet fully exhausted all of its diplomatic ability to communicate with the West. We see this by the visit of the British foreign minister that was implemented 2 days ago, if I'm not mistaken. We also see this by the visit of the German foreign minister, who is arriving probably this very moment. So they still can communicate, and they still have very basic, probably, but level of trust from our Western partners. All they need to do is actually two very simple things. The first one, to stop anti-Western propaganda that we have been seeing from entities, TV channels, media, political parties affiliated with the ruling party or being its satellites. And second, to start proper implementation of 12 points issued by the European Union. We've already witnessed that there is ability to implement those points that do not require political involvement. So if there are points which do not decrease absolute power of Georgian Dream, they're perfectly able to implement them. The problem is that those 12 requirements or recommendations, as the EU calls them, they also are connected to issues directly intervening with GD's agenda to retain absolute power. It is building democracy, it is opening up political space, it is communication with civil society, it is electoral reform, it is Charles Michel's agreement. So quite a lot of stuff which is sensitive to Georgian Dream politically, but crucially important for Georgian democracy to finally consolidate itself. So if there will be political will within the Georgian Dream to implement these points, there is still some time and some chance to get the status. Now, as a person who is studying international relations, and probably I think you will join me in this assumption, right now we have a unique window of opportunity, both for Georgia and Moldova and Ukraine. Not being able to use this window of opportunity is a direct, I would call it even a treason to Georgia's national interests. And it is absolute necessity, geopolitical imperative for Georgia to be able and get both the status and eventually join the European Union. So again, if there is political will from the Georgian Dream, we see that they can make painful decisions, just like it was with the Russian law, when 75 or 78 MPs pressed the green button, and the very next day, following the mass protests, the same people pressed the red button. So they have ability to do it if they have political will. So also—
Actually, they didn't press it. They just abstained. They left the oppositional parties.
Yeah, and also we had one MP who actually pressed yes, but whatever. We see that they are able to step back when necessary. So right now, I believe it is an absolute necessity for the Georgian Dream to survive as a political party. So I hope that this instinct of self-survival will be stronger than their willingness to stay in power, in absolute power, I would like to mention.
Thank you very much. We have one question from the audience. Mrs. Iris Kempe is asking, how does the Zeitenwende German Zeitenwende affected the reality in both countries? Can we answer this question very briefly?
Well, I can
in Armenia and in Georgia.
I can try to start with Georgia if you want to, but I can. Okay.
Yes, please.
So,
yes, please.
So the Zeitenwende is a very good thing on paper. It is very right policy decision, also following the disastrous policy decisions by the Merkel's government. So in this case, it is a step in a very right direction. On the other hand, the Zeitenwende still has to happen. It means total change of German foreign policy, and we know that it takes time. So eventually, I want to believe that visit of Minister Baerbock is part of the Zeitenwende, and that eventually, hopefully, it will result in total change of German policy regarding Eastern neighbors in general. Because we need German leadership on this. We need Germany to fully understand geopolitical implications. And we also need Germany to understand how we got to this situation. What happened in 2008, to fully reevaluate German foreign policy and to be able to contribute to a stronger European Union.
Thank you. Let's hope that this epochal shift, the Zeitenwende, this described differently, will also affect the relations between our countries and Germany's, and in general, the Germany's approach towards the Eastern Partnership. And Mikayel, your answer to that question, please, if you would like to say something.
I agree. Thank you for the question. I agree that this change in German foreign policy, it has been very important for all Eastern neighbors, and including Armenia, because I think until recently, Germany was punching below its weight when it came to relations with former Soviet countries. And in case of Armenia, the contrast was especially obvious when you compare it with France, because France was always very much involved, and probably, of course, partly due to the Armenian diaspora, but also because France felt that it has it has something to do when it came to Karabakh conflict, and it was a member of the Minsk group. But today, Azerbaijan is sort of considering France to be an Armenian ally. So Azerbaijan is no longer ready to accept France as a mediator. So this is where Germany could step in, for example. And in a recent press conference, Prime Minister Pashinyan, he commented on this situation that there were meetings previously where there was Armenia, Azerbaijan, the president of the European Union, and President Macron. And now Azerbaijan is refusing to take part in this format because they are saying that France is pro-Armenian. So Pashinyan said, okay, if you don't want France, then maybe we can have the other heavyweight of the European Union. Maybe we can have Germany at the table. So at this point, it is just a suggestion. But I think that's a suggestion which reflects the new role of Germany and the new trends in German foreign policy. And of course, if ever Germany decides that it wants to be a player and do more than it is doing now, I think it will be very welcome by Armenia. And in general, also, I think the new government's policy of supporting democracy and not trying to find accommodation with Russia at any price, I think that's a very welcome move. And also in Armenia, it has been noted, and there are some hopes associated with that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. I would like to thank the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation for this opportunity again, and inform our audience that after the Easter holidays, we will be back on 30th of April this year. And once again, many thanks for this very interesting discussion.
Thank you, Ambassador, for moderating.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.